Hi class, I'm making this short video to help you construct a digital graph using Google Sheets. So the first thing you're going to want to do is enter in your data from your data table. This is the balloon circumference data, so I want to make sure I change my label of my sheet because I'm going to have two graphs for each situation. So here's balloon circumference, and here's my data. So next thing I'm going to do is highlight all of my data from that table, and I'm going to go to Insert and then Chart. Okay, so this still needs some work. Like there's no axes labels, they're incomplete, and my title only discusses sugar, so that's not complete either. So there's still some work to do, but it's a good start. Before we go any further, the first decision that has to be made is, should this be a bar graph or a line graph? So that's something that your table is going to discuss, and then we're going to go over the differences between bar and line graphs in class, and a decision will be made. So in this case, I'm going to decide to change it to a line graph, since this is data that is measured over time. The next thing I want to do is, I always like to do my axes labels next and then do the title. So my dependent variable goes on the y-axis, and the dependent variable is what's being measured here. The data that I selected from the data table is all about measuring the size of the circumference of the balloon. So that's what needs to go in that y-axis label because of that. So what I'm going to do is go up to here to where it says Customize, and then I'm going to go to Chart and Axis Titles, okay? So the first thing I want to do, I don't want to do the horizontal or the y-axis title, I want to do that vertical y-axis title. So I'm going to go to vertical, and then I'm going to type in what that data represents. So 0 to 15 represents the circumference of the balloon, so I'm going to put that in. And then you always want to put in the units. In this case, we measured the circumference of the balloon in centimeters, so we want to include that. Okay, so that title is done. The next one we want to do is the horizontal, or the x-axis. So I'm going to change it to horizontal title now, and we want to look at that. So in this case, those numbers represent time, right? So that's what I want to put here. Time, and then the units we used, although it is written right there next to each number, I'm still going to add it in minutes. Okay, and then the last thing we want to do is include the title. So in the title, it's not the only way to write a title, but it's a way that I often teach students to do it because it helps you to remember everything. So one of the ways to write it is to do the independent variable and then versus the dependent variable. In this lab, the independent variable, what was different about the 3 test tubes was the amount of sugar. So we would want to include that first because that's our independent. So let me double click, or you can just type it right here. Okay, chart title. So we're going to have sugar added, and then we're going to say versus. So remember, our dependent variable is the circumference of the size of the balloon. And then all of this wasn't just measured once, it was measured multiple times over time. So that's the last thing we want to do, is just say over time. And that's our title. So now that this is done, the next thing I want to do is do another sheet. So I'm going to add sheet, and I'm going to label that, I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to label that test. Well, actually, I'll just make it foam height. Okay, I'm going to pause this and come back after I entered in my data. Okay, so now I have entered in my data for the foam height. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to highlight the data set, go to Insert and Chart. And you can see it's a very similar graph, but what we measured is different. It follows the same pattern, which is interesting, right, for each of the amounts of sugar, but the way that we measured what happened is just measuring foam height rather than balloon circumference. So we want to kind of stick to the same things we did before. We're going to start with our axis title. So the y-axis, or our dependent variable, is instead of balloon circumference, it's foam height. So we're going to go to Customize again, Chart and Axis Titles, and we're going to go to our vertical axis title. So foam height, and then we're going to put the units, right? It was centimeters. That, and then we want to go to our horizontal axis title and put that in. In this case, it's the same as the other graph, right? So it's time. The last thing we want to do, again, is our title, right, at the top. So we're going to go to the drop down and go to Chart Title. And it's going to be very similar to what we did before because it's still the same independent variable. But we're going to say instead of balloon circumference, we're going to do foam height. So that's what we're going to type next because that's the dependent variable. Remember, it's independent variable versus dependent variable. And then remember, this was the same thing. It was like taken multiple times over time. So we want to put over time. There is our graph. So we should have two graphs, each with appropriate titles, and then you're going to submit that in Google Classroom because it's going to be assigned to you. So you're going to want to submit that and make sure again that you have completed all of the parts in the video. So good luck.